There are moments in your life that arrive disguised as something ordinary. They were the camouflage of a Tuesday night, or the quiet hum of a refrigerator, or the familiar weight of a friend leaning against you on the couch. You don't recognize them as architecture, as the load-bearing walls of the person you are about to become. You simply live them, breathe them in like common air, and it is only in retrospect, from the vantage point of a future you could not have imagined, that you see them for what they were, the beginning of everything. For me, that moment smelled like clean laundry and the faint, citrusy scent of Julian's shampoo. It felt like the soft give of a cushion and the almost imperceptible warmth of his breath against the fabric of my jeans. He was asleep. It was a state I had become intimately familiar with, a landscape I had learned to navigate with the careful precision of a cartographer charting unknown territory. His head was in my lap, a profound and terrifying weight that seemed to anchor me to the very core of the earth. The television murmured in the corner, casting flickering blue and gold light across his face, sculpting shadows under his cheekbones and catching in the dark sweep of his eyelashes. He had arrived at my door 2 hours earlier, a ghost haunting the threshold, his shoulders slumped with the kind of exhaustion that had less to do with a lack of sleep and more to do with a depletion of the soul. He carried the remnants of another brutal week on the road, another city that wasn't home, another hotel room that was just a sterile box for his loneliness. He hadn't said much, just offered a tired smile that didn't reach his eyes and mumbled something about needing a place to decompress that wasn't his own empty apartment. I had made him tea, the chamomile blend I always kept for this exact purpose, and we had settled onto the couch, the vast, forgiving continent of gray upholstery that had become the silent witness to the slow, tectonic shift in our friendship. The movie was something forgettable, a generic thriller whose plot points dissolved as soon as they appeared, serving only as a socially acceptable excuse for silence, for proximity. And then, as it always did, the inevitable tide had pulled him under. First, his head had listed, coming to rest against my shoulder, a casual, friendly point of contact that I had trained my body not to react to, not to tense up, not to betray the frantic symphony playing out in my chest. Then, slowly, incrementally, he had slid down, his body relaxing into the pull of gravity and trust, until his head was resting fully in my lap. His hand, which had been loosely holding his phone, went slack, the device slipping from his fingers and landing with a soft thud on the rug. And there we were, in the quiet space between friendship and something else, a space I had lived in for years. I watched the rhythmic rise and fall of his chest. I could feel the faint vibration of it through my legs, a steady, living pulse that seemed to sync with my own frantic heartbeat until they found a shared, calmer rhythm. This was our ritual, an unspoken ceremony that had begun months ago, after his world had fractured. It was a ritual built on plausible deniability. He was tired. He was stressed. He just needed a friend. And I was his friend. I was the safe harbor, the quiet port in his storm. I was the one who wouldn't ask questions, who would just let him be. But for me, these moments were anything but simple. They were a form of exquisite torture. Each time he sought this comfort from me, a wild, treacherous hope would unfurl in my chest, a delicate fern breaking through frozen ground. And with it came the terror. The terror that I would move wrong, breathe wrong, that some unconscious signal would betray the truth I kept locked away behind my ribs, that my feelings for him had long ago crossed the boundary of friendship and ventured into a territory so vast and consuming it often left me breathless. Gently, so as not to wake him, I reached out and brushed a stray strand of dark hair from his forehead. My fingers barely grazed his skin, but a jolt, electric and sharp, shot up my arm. It was a dangerous thing, this casual touch. It was a currency I was not supposed to possess, a language I was not supposed to speak. Julian murmured in his sleep, a soft, incoherent sound, and shifted slightly, nuzzling his cheek more firmly against my thigh. My breath caught in my throat. It was such an innocent, unconscious gesture, a simple seeking of comfort, but to me, it felt like a confession. It felt like an answer to a question I would never be brave enough to ask. In the blue-white light of the television, I studied the relaxed lines of his face, a face I knew as well as my own. I knew the way his left eyebrow arched slightly higher than his right when he was skeptical. I knew the small scar just at his hairline from a childhood fall. I knew the way his lips curved even in sleep, holding the ghost of a smile. I knew this man. I knew his heart, his humor, his fears. And I loved him. I loved him with a quiet, desperate, and utterly hopeless intensity. And in that moment, with the weight of him in my lap and the silent apartment breathing around us, that love felt less like a secret and more like the only truth in the world. This was the moment disguised as a Tuesday night. This was the architecture. And I knew, with a certainty that was both terrifying and thrilling, that the foundation was about to crack. Our friendship had been built on the solid bedrock of shared interests and easy laughter. We met 7 years ago, drafted onto the same recreational soccer team, a chaotic assembly of has-beens and never-weres who cared more about the post-game beers than the final score. Julian was impossible to miss. He was the team's engine, a blur of kinetic energy and relentless optimism, shouting encouragement, chasing down lost causes, and celebrating every goal, whether it was his or someone else's, with an infectious, unself-conscious joy. He was all bright sunlight and forward momentum. I, on the other hand, was the goalkeeper. My domain was the 18-yard box, a rectangle of grass where I waited, I watched, I anticipated. My role was reactive, a study in patience and observation. It was a fitting metaphor for our personalities. He was the force of action. I was the point of stillness. He had approached me after our first disastrous game, a 5-1 loss where I had faced an onslaught of shots. I was sitting on the bench, peeling off my gloves, my body aching, stewing in the quiet frustration of defeat. He clapped a hand on my shoulder, his grin wide and undiminished by the score. "You were incredible, man," he'd said, his voice breathless. "Like a cat with 6 legs. We would have lost by 20 if it wasn't for you." I remember being taken aback. In my experience, goalkeepers were usually noticed only for their mistakes. To be seen for the saves, for the effort, was a novelty. I think I mumbled a thank you, and used to such direct and effusive praise. He didn't seem to notice my awkwardness. He just kept talking, a torrent of words about the game, about a terrible call the referee made, about how we'd get them next week. He had a way of pulling you into his orbit, his enthusiasm acting like a gravitational force. That was the beginning. Soccer games became post-game beers, which became weeknight dinners, which became the effortless intimacy of a true friendship. I learned the topography of his life. He was a software consultant, a job that sounded impressive and stable, but in reality involved a grueling travel schedule that left him perpetually jet-lagged and living out of a suitcase. He spoke of spreadsheets and client meetings with a kind of weary detachment, but his face would light up when he talked about his side projects, the intricate mobile apps he was building in his spare time, tiny digital worlds born from his own creativity. I, in turn, shared my world with him. I was a freelance photographer, a job that allowed me to indulge my natural inclination to observe from the periphery. I showed him my work, the quiet portraits and stark landscapes I captured. He was the perfect audience, genuinely curious and full of insightful questions. He didn't just see a picture of a tree. He saw the way the light fell through the leaves, the story in the gnarled bark. He saw the world with an artist's sensitivity, even if he didn't think of himself that way. For the first few years, my affection for him was simple, uncomplicated. He was my best friend. The person I called when my car broke down. The person who helped me move a ridiculously heavy antique darkroom enlarger into my apartment. The person who could make me laugh so hard my sides ached. The line was clear, the boundaries firmly in place. He dated, I didn't. He would tell me about the women he was seeing, describing first dates and awkward encounters with a kind of bewildered humor. I would listen, offering advice, playing the role of the supportive friend, all while a quiet, unnamed ache settled in my chest. I told myself it was just the loneliness of being single, a general yearning for connection, not a specific yearning for him. It was a lie, of course, but it was a necessary one. A carefully constructed dam holding back a reservoir of feeling that I was certain would sweep away everything we had built if I ever let it break. The moment the first crack appeared in that dam is seared into my memory like a photographic burn. It was about 3 years into our friendship. We were at a mutual friend's barbecue, a lazy summer afternoon thick with the smell of charcoal and cut grass. Julian was there with his girlfriend at the time, Sarah. She was perfectly nice, smart and funny and beautiful, and they looked good together. The kind of couple people described as golden. I was watching them from across the lawn. He was trying to teach her how to throw a frisbee, his hands gently guiding her arm, his head bent close to hers as he explained the technique. He was laughing, and the sun caught the gold flecks in his brown eyes, and in that instant, the dam didn't just crack, it shattered. It wasn't jealousy, not in the petty, possessive sense. It was a profound, hollow ache of recognition. The feeling that washed over me was so powerful, so absolute. It felt like a physical impact. It was the devastating, indisputable knowledge that I wanted to be the one he looked at that way. I wanted to be the one who made him laugh like that. I wanted to be the reason for that light in his eyes. I had to walk away. I went inside the house, my heart hammering against my ribs, and splashed cold water on my face in the bathroom. I looked at my reflection in the mirror, and the truth was staring back at me, undeniable. I was in love with my best friend. The realization didn't feel like a gentle dawn. It felt like a collision. From that day on, everything was different, at least for me. Our easy friendship was now overlaid with a new layer of complexity, a constant, low-level hum of anxiety and longing. I became a meticulous archivist of our interactions, replaying conversations in my head, dissecting his words, his gestures, searching for any hidden meaning, any sign that he might feel even a fraction of what I felt. A casual touch on the arm would send my thoughts spiraling for hours. A shared look across a crowded room would sustain me for days. I became an expert in self-preservation. I built new walls, higher and more fortified than the old ones. I learned to smile and nod when he talked about his relationship with Sarah. I learned to keep a careful, measured distance, to never let my gaze linger too long, to never let a touch last a second more than what was considered platonically acceptable. I channeled all that yearning into my work. My photography became more intense, more focused on themes of isolation and unspoken connection. I took portraits of strangers, trying to capture the secret stories in their eyes. I photographed empty rooms, focusing on the way sunlight filled a vacant space, trying to articulate the feeling of presence in absence. My art became the only place I could be honest. Julian, for his part, seemed oblivious. Our friendship continued as it always had, a testament to my carefully constructed performance. He was my best friend, and I was his. It was a fragile, beautiful, and heartbreaking equilibrium, and I was terrified of doing anything that might upset it. I was content, or at least I told myself I was, to live in the quiet space of observation, to love him from the safe distance of the sidelines. I never imagined that he would be the one to start crossing the field. The shift began not with a bang, but with the slow, grinding erosion of a relationship. Julian and Sarah's golden sheen had started to tarnish over time. From my vantage point, it was a classic case of diverging paths. He was constantly on the road, while she was building a life, a career, a community in one place. The distance wasn't just geographical, it became emotional. Their conversations, once vibrant and full of shared jokes, became logistical negotiations over FaceTime. The easy intimacy was replaced by a strained effort to connect across time zones and disparate experiences. Julian rarely complained. It wasn't his nature, but I could see the toll it was taking. He grew quieter, more withdrawn. The bright light in his eyes seemed to dim, replaced by a perpetual weariness. He started spending more of his rare weekends at home at my apartment, seeking refuge from the growing silence in his own. Their breakup, when it finally happened, was quiet and civilized, a mutual acknowledgement that they were trying to force a key into a lock it no longer fit. There was no drama, no shouting match, just a deep, lingering sadness. Julian called me the night it ended, his voice flat and hollow. He didn't cry. He just recounted the conversation with the detached precision of someone reporting on a technical failure. He said all the right things. It was for the best. They both deserved to be happy. It was no one's fault. But beneath the stoic facade, I could hear the fracture in his voice. He was adrift. The future he had been building, the life he had envisioned, had just dissolved into mist. "Can I come over?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. It wasn't a question. It was a plea. He arrived at my door looking like a ship that had been battered by a storm, sails torn, compass broken. That was the first night he fell asleep on my couch. We had been talking for hours, or rather, I had been listening as he spoke in fits and starts, circling the same points, trying to make sense of the emptiness that had suddenly opened up in his life. At some point, his words trailed off, and a heavy silence filled the room. I looked over and saw that his eyes were closed, his head slumped against the back of the couch. He looked so vulnerable, so utterly spent, that my heart ached with a fierce, protective instinct. I didn't have the heart to wake him. I gently lifted his legs onto the cushions, took off his shoes, and covered him with a thick wool blanket from the back of my armchair. I watched him for a long time before going to my own bed. The image of his sleeping form imprinted on my mind. That night set a new precedent. My apartment became his sanctuary. He would text me after a long flight. "Just landed. Mind if I crash for a bit?" He never went to his own place first. It was as if the apartment he had once shared with Sarah was haunted by the ghost of a life that no longer existed. He needed neutral ground, and I was it. At first, it was always the couch. He would collapse onto it, and I would let him sleep, working quietly at my editing desk, the soft clicks of my mouse the only sound in the room. I told myself I was just being a good friend. It was what anyone would do. But I was hyper-aware of his presence, of the subtle shift in the apartment's atmosphere. His being there changed the quality of the air, made the light feel different. The space felt less like mine and more like ours. Then, one night, the boundary shifted again. He had come over straight from the airport after a brutal trip to the West Coast. He was fighting a cold, his face pale and his eyes glassy. He looked completely wrecked. He fell asleep on the couch within minutes of arriving. A few hours later, I was woken up by a sound from the living room. I found him standing by the window, wrapped in the blanket, shivering despite the warmth of the apartment. "I'm sorry, did I wake you?" he whispered, his voice hoarse. "No. Are you okay?" "Just cold," he said, his teeth chattering slightly. "And my back is killing me. This couch is not made for 6'2" insomniacs." He tried for a smile, but it was a weak, fleeting thing. And then, I said the words that would change everything. They left my mouth before I had a chance to think them through, propelled by a wave of sympathy and a deeper, more selfish desire to have him closer. "You can take my bed," I said. "I can sleep out here." He shook his head immediately. "No way, man. I'm not kicking you out of your own bed. It's fine, Julian. I can sleep anywhere." We stood there for a moment in the semi-darkness, a silent standoff. He looked so miserable, so utterly defeated. The silence stretched, and then another option, a far more dangerous and intoxicating one, presented itself. It hung in the air between us, unspoken but palpable. "It's a big bed," I said, my voice quieter than I intended. "We can share. It's no big deal." I held my breath. It felt like I had just stepped off a cliff, unsure if I would fly or fall. He looked at me, his gaze searching my face in the dim light, and for a heart-stopping second, I was sure he could see everything, that he could read the desperate hope in my eyes. He finally gave a small, tired nod. "Okay," he whispered. "If you're sure." I was not sure. I was not sure of anything. But I led him to my bedroom, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. He crawled under the covers on the far side of the queen-sized mattress, a vast, empty expanse separating us. He was asleep again almost instantly, his breathing evening out into a soft, rhythmic cadence. But I lay awake for hours, rigid and motionless, staring at the ceiling. I was acutely aware of him, of his warmth radiating across the mattress, of the slight dip his body made in the bed. I had invited the storm into my port, and I had no idea if my harbor was strong enough to withstand it. That night was the beginning of the ritual. It became our new, unspoken normal. The pretense of the couch was abandoned. Whenever Julian stayed over, which was now 2 or 3 nights a week, he would end up in my bed. There was always a plausible reason. He'd had a long flight. He'd had a stressful week. His own bed was lonely. He never said that last one aloud, but I could hear it in the quiet spaces between his words. I never questioned it. I simply accepted it, this strange, new intimacy that had woven itself into the fabric of our friendship. Each time was a delicate, nerve-wracking dance of unspoken rules. We would maintain a careful distance, a buffer zone of several inches of sheet and comforter between us. We would lie on our backs or on our sides facing away from each other. We never touched. It was a perfect illusion of platonic cohabitation. But for me, lying there in the dark, the illusion was paper thin. My senses were heightened to an almost painful degree. I was aware of every shift of his weight, every soft sigh he made in his sleep. I could smell the faint, clean scent of his skin, a scent that was becoming as familiar to me as my own. I would lie awake for hours, listening to the rhythm of his breathing, a steady, reassuring metronome in the silence of the night. It was a form of self-inflicted torture to be so close to what I wanted most in the world and yet be unable to reach for it. My bed, once my sanctuary, had become a space of profound tension, a landscape of yearning. It was both a haven and a cage. Sometimes, in the depths of the night, he would shift in his sleep, and an arm or a leg would cross the invisible boundary between us. The accidental brush of his skin against mine would send a shock wave through my system, my entire body going rigid. I would hold my breath, waiting for him to move away, my heart pounding a frantic, silent rhythm against the mattress. He always would, retreating back to his side, oblivious. But the ghost of his touch would linger, a phantom warmth on my skin that would keep me awake until the first gray light of dawn began to creep through the blinds. These nights were an education in restraint. I learned the precise weight of a blanket, the subtle topography of a mattress, the infinite variations in the sound of a sleeping man's breath. I was a scholar of proximity, an expert in the agonizing geography of our shared space. The ritual extended beyond the bedroom. It bled into the small, domestic corners of our lives. He started leaving a toothbrush in my bathroom, a spare change of clothes in my closet. He would make coffee for both of us in the morning, moving around my kitchen with a casual familiarity that was both comforting and heart-stopping. We would sit at my small dining table, sipping from our mugs in a comfortable silence, the morning light streaming through the window. In these moments, it was easy to pretend. It was easy to slip into the fantasy that this was real, that we were building a life together, that this quiet domesticity was the foundation of a shared future. But then he would glance at his watch, the spell would break, and he would be gone, back to his own life, his own apartment, leaving me alone with the ghost of our shared morning and the lingering scent of his coffee. Our friends, the few who were left from our old soccer team, started to notice. "You and Julian are practically married," one of them joked one evening when we were out for drinks. I felt a hot blush creep up my neck, but Julian just laughed it off. "Leo's just a better roommate than my empty apartment," he'd said, clapping me on the shoulder. The casual, dismissive nature of his comment was like a small, sharp stone in my shoe, a reminder of the chasm between my reality and his. For him, this was a convenience, a comfort. For me, it was my entire world. I lived for the moments he was there and merely existed in the moments he was not. I tried to understand what was happening from his perspective. Was he truly oblivious? Or was he, in his own way, exploring the boundaries of our relationship, testing the waters? He was a man adrift, grasping for an anchor in the storm of his post-breakup life. I knew that. I knew I was his anchor. But was I just a friend, a stable presence? Or was there something more? His actions were a constant source of confusion. He would seek a level of physical intimacy with me, sharing a bed, falling asleep in my lap, that felt far beyond the normal bounds of male friendship. Yet, he never spoke of it. He never acknowledged the strangeness of our arrangement. We existed in a state of profound ambiguity, a fog of unspoken feelings and plausible deniability. My photography became my only outlet. I started a new series, a collection of self-portraits. But I was never alone in the frame. I would set up the camera on a tripod in my bedroom at night, using a long exposure to capture the space. I would lie on my side of the bed, and on the other side, the space Julian usually occupied would be an empty, blurred hollow, an absence that was more powerful than any presence. The resulting images were haunting, filled with a palpable sense of longing. They were pictures of a man waiting, a man in a room that was full, yet felt profoundly empty. They were the most honest things I had ever created. I never showed them to him. I couldn't. They were a confession in silver gelatin, a truth too raw to be exposed to the light. One rainy Thursday night, the ritual escalated. Julian had been in Chicago for a week, a particularly grueling trip filled with back-to-back meetings and demanding clients. He texted me from the cab on his way from the airport. Heading to your place. Need to collapse. He arrived looking like a frayed electrical wire, buzzing with a nervous, exhausted energy. He barely spoke, just dropped his bag by the door, stripped off his travel-worn clothes, and crawled into my bed. I followed a few minutes later, slipping under the covers, maintaining our usual careful distance. The rain hammered against the window pane, a relentless, percussive rhythm that seemed to mirror the turmoil in my own chest. For a long time, neither of us moved. I assumed he had fallen asleep instantly, as he usually did. But then, in the darkness, his voice, quiet and rough, cut through the sound of the rain. Leo, my heart leaped into my throat. Yeah, I can't turn my brain off. I turned my head on the pillow to look at him. I could just make out his silhouette in the faint light filtering in from the street. He was lying on his back, staring at the ceiling. Long week, I said, my own voice sounding strained to my ears. The longest, he breathed. A long silence followed. The rain continued its assault on the glass. I could feel the tension radiating from him, a palpable thing in the small space between us. He was a tightly coiled spring. Then, he shifted, turning onto his side to face me. My breath hitched. This was new. We never faced each other. This is going to sound weird, he started, his voice barely a whisper. I waited, my entire body rigid with anticipation. Can you? I don't know. Can you just hold me or something? He rushed the last few words out, as if they burned his tongue. I feel like I'm going to fly apart. The world stopped. The rain, the city, my own breathing, it all ceased to exist. There was only his voice, his whispered, desperate request hanging in the air between us. It was the most vulnerable I had ever heard him. The plausible deniability was gone. This was not about being tired. This was not about convenience. This was a direct, unambiguous plea for comfort, for contact. My mind raced, a frantic slideshow of all the possible consequences. This was a line, a definitive, irreversible line. If I crossed it, there was no going back. The safe, agonizing equilibrium of our friendship would be shattered forever. I could say no. I could pretend I didn't understand. I could make a joke and deflect, preserving the status quo. But looking at his silhouette in the darkness, hearing the raw need in his voice, I knew I couldn't. I couldn't leave him adrift. And maybe, just maybe, I was tired of being an anchor chained to the harbor floor. Maybe I wanted to be the ship sailing alongside him. Slowly, tentatively, I turned onto my side to face him. I reached out an arm and wrapped it around his middle, pulling him closer. He came willingly, melting against me, his body fitting into mine as if it were made to be there. He buried his face in my chest, his arm coming up to rest on my side. I rested my chin on the top of his head, breathing in the scent of his hair. His body was tense at first, a collection of tight muscles and sharp angles. But as I held him, I felt the tension slowly begin to drain away. He let out a long, shuddering breath, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of the entire week, of all the lonely months before it. We lay like that in silence for a long time, the only sound the rain and the soft, steady beat of our hearts. His breathing deepened, evening out as he finally began to drift towards sleep. My own heart, which had been hammering against my ribs, slowly calmed, settling into a deep, resonant rhythm. This was it. This was the moment the earth shifted on its axis. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. It was everything I had ever wanted. For the first time in months, I wasn't lying awake in a state of anxious vigilance. I was holding the man I loved, and he was holding me back. The ritual was broken, and in its place, something new, something fragile and terrifying and beautiful, was beginning to form. And for the first time, in the warm, safe darkness of my own bed, I allowed myself to feel the one thing I had been suppressing for years: hope. The following weeks were a strange, beautiful, and nerve-wracking dream. The line we had crossed that rainy night was not a one-time event. It was a new territory we had decided to inhabit together. The invisible barrier in my bed was gone. We slept tangled together, his head on my chest, my arm draped over his waist. The accidental touches were replaced by intentional, lingering contact. It was a silent conversation spoken in the language of proximity and warmth. The plausible deniability had evaporated, but it was replaced by a new, unspoken agreement. We would not name this thing between us. We would simply let it exist, a fragile ecosystem we were both afraid to disturb with the clumsiness of words. The domesticity deepened. He started staying for entire weekends, not just a night here and there. His clothes began to colonize more of my closet space. His favorite coffee blend became a permanent fixture in my pantry. We fell into a rhythm that felt less like friendship and more like partnership. We cooked together, our bodies brushing past each other in the small kitchen. We went grocery shopping, bickering playfully over what to buy. We spent lazy Sundays reading in comfortable silence on the couch, his feet in my lap. It was a quiet, gentle unfolding. Each day, I felt the tight knot of anxiety in my chest loosen just a little more. The fear of him leaving, of this all being a temporary arrangement, began to recede, replaced by a tentative sense of peace. But the silence, once a comfort, began to feel heavy. We had built this incredible intimacy, this physical language of care and affection, but the emotional core of it remained unspoken. We were living like a couple, sleeping like a couple, but we had never once addressed the profound shift in our relationship. I was terrified to bring it up, afraid that giving it a name would somehow break the spell. But the questions echoed in my mind. What were we? What did this mean to him? Was this just a form of healing for him, a temporary comfort as he got over his last relationship? Or was it something more? Was it possible? Was it even remotely possible that he felt what I felt? The moment of truth arrived on a night that was almost painfully ordinary. It was a Friday. Julian had been home for the whole week, a rare occurrence. We had ordered pizza and were watching some mindless documentary about deep-sea creatures. He was lying on the couch, his head once again in my lap, a position that was now our default, no longer fraught with the tension of the unknown. I was running my fingers through his hair, a casual, affectionate gesture that had become second nature. The narrator on the television was droning on about bioluminescent fish in the crushing darkness of the abyss. Julian stirred, tilting his head back to look up at me. The flickering light from the screen danced in his eyes. He looked so open, so unguarded. "Leo," he said, his voice soft. He was quiet for a moment, his gaze searching my face. I could see a flicker of something in his eyes, nervousness, uncertainty. My own heart began to pick up its pace. "Would it be okay?" he started, then stopped, swallowing hard. "Would it be okay if I kissed you?" The world narrowed to the space between our faces. The documentary, the pizza, the apartment, it all faded away. There was only his question, hanging in the air like a hummingbird, delicate and vibrant and impossibly still. It was the question I had dreamed of, the question I had resigned myself to never hearing. And he was asking it with such raw, undisguised vulnerability, as if he was handing me his heart and trusting me not to drop it. I couldn't find my voice. The words were trapped in my throat, a logjam of years of unspoken feelings. So I just nodded. A small, jerky movement. It was all I could manage. That seemed to be enough. He slowly pushed himself up, his eyes never leaving mine. He moved with a kind of deliberate, tentative grace, as if he were approaching a frightened animal. He cupped my face in his hands, his thumbs stroking my cheeks. His hands were warm, steady. He leaned in, and my eyes fluttered shut. The kiss was not what I had expected. It wasn't a passionate, movie-style explosion. It was something far better. It was soft, hesitant, a question in itself. It was a gentle press of his lips against mine, a moment of profound, breathtaking stillness. It tasted of salt and hope. It was a confession. It was an apology for all the lost time. It was a promise. It was everything. When he pulled back, he rested his forehead against mine. We stayed like that, breathing the same air, our eyes closed. Okay, he whispered, as if to himself. Yeah, okay. I finally found my voice, a rough, shaky thing. Okay, I whispered back. The dam had not just cracked. It had been gently, carefully dismantled, stone by stone. And the reservoir of feeling I had held back for so long didn't rush out in a destructive flood. It flowed, calm and clear, into the open, welcoming space he had created. In the quiet of my living room, with the blue light of the television painting our faces, we had finally found a language we could both understand. The silence was broken, not by a shout, but by a whisper, and it was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. In the mythology I had constructed in my own head, the kiss was supposed to be the final chapter, the satisfying resolution to years of unspoken yearning. It was the moment the credits would roll, the screen would fade to black, and the audience would leave with a sense of hopeful closure. But life is not a movie. A single moment, no matter how profound, cannot instantly resolve years of confusion and ingrained patterns of self-protection. The kiss was not an ending. It was a new and far more complicated beginning. And the aftermath was a landscape of treacherous, beautiful, and terrifying uncertainty. The immediate hours that followed were a kind of dizzying bliss. We didn't talk much more that night. We didn't need to. We just held each other, the kiss having unlocked a new level of physical intimacy. We went to bed, and for the first time, it felt completely, unequivocally right. There was no hesitation, no unspoken rules. Just the simple, profound comfort of being in each other's arms. I fell asleep that night feeling a sense of peace so deep it felt as if it had settled into my very bones. I had risked everything, and I had been met with tenderness and reciprocity. It felt like a miracle. But when I woke up the next morning, the space beside me in the bed was empty. The indentation of his head was still on the pillow, the sheets were still warm, but Julian was gone. A cold knot of dread began to form in my stomach. I got out of bed and walked into the living room. His bag was gone. His shoes were gone. On the kitchen counter was a single, hastily scribbled note. Had to run. Talk later, talk later. The two most ambiguous and terrifying words in the English language. The peace I had felt just hours before evaporated, replaced by a frantic, buzzing anxiety. I replayed the previous night in my head, searching for any misstep, any sign that I had misread the situation. The kiss. His question. The way he held me. It had all felt so real, so certain. How could I have gotten it so wrong? The day crawled by in a state of suspended animation. I couldn't eat. I couldn't work. I just sat on the couch, staring at my phone, willing it to ring. Every notification, every buzz, sent a jolt of adrenaline through me, followed by a wave of disappointment when it was just a spam email or a news alert. The silence from him was deafening. The apartment, which had been our shared sanctuary, now felt like a lonely, echoing chamber, every surface holding a memory of him that now felt painful. The hope that had bloomed so brightly in my chest began to wither, curling in on itself, turning to ash. He finally called late that afternoon. His voice was strained, distant. "Hey," he said, the single word sounding heavy and forced. "Hey," I replied, trying to keep my own voice steady, betraying none of the panic I was feeling. "Everything okay?" "Yeah, fine. Just swamped with some work stuff I forgot about." It was a flimsy excuse, and we both knew it. Julian never forgot about work stuff. "Oh, okay." The silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. This was the Julian from before, the one who built walls and deflected with polite half-truths. The open, vulnerable man from the night before was gone. "Look, Leo," he finally said, his voice dropping lower. About last night. I think I moved too fast. I'm a mess right now. I'm not in a good place, and it wasn't fair of me to drag you into it. I'm sorry. Every word was a hammer blow. He wasn't just stepping back. He was trying to erase what had happened, to categorize it as a mistake, a symptom of his own confusion. He was recasting our moment of connection as a moment of weakness on his part. The hurt was so sharp, so sudden, it literally took my breath away. All the old fears, all the insecurities I had kept at bay, came rushing back in a tidal wave. I had been a convenience, a temporary comfort, a stand-in until he figured his own life out. So that's it? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. It was just a mistake? I didn't say that, he said quickly, defensively. It's just complicated. I don't know what I'm doing, Leo. And you're my best friend. I can't risk messing that up. It was the ultimate retreat, the classic justification. He was using our friendship as a shield, a reason not to engage with the very thing that was threatening to turn our friendship into something more. He was scared, and in his fear, he was hurting me more deeply than he could possibly imagine. A cold anger began to replace the hurt, an anger born of frustration and the profound injustice of the situation. He was the one who had initiated everything. He had sought me out, leaned on me, slept in my bed, asked to kiss me. And now he was acting as if I had been the one pushing, the one demanding something he couldn't give. You don't get to do that, Julian, I said, my voice gaining a hard edge I rarely used. You don't get to cross every line and then run away and hide behind our friendship when it gets real. You don't get to ask for my comfort, my bed, my body, and then tell me you're sorry for dragging me into it. I am not a rehab facility for your broken heart. I am a person. And what happened last night meant something to me. And you have to at least have the decency to face that. The line went silent. I had never spoken to him like that before. I had always been the patient one, the quiet observer. But my patience had run out. The silence stretched for so long I thought he had hung up. I need some time, he finally whispered, his voice sounding small and broken. I need to think. And then he hung up. The days that followed were some of the worst of my life. The silence was absolute. He didn't call. He didn't text. It was as if he had vanished from the face of the earth. The grief I felt was twofold. I was grieving the loss of the nascent romantic connection we had shared, and I was grieving the potential loss of the friendship that had been the bedrock of my life for 7 years. I had gambled everything, and it seemed I had lost it all. My anger faded, replaced by a deep, hollow ache. I had pushed him, and he had run. Maybe he was right. Maybe I should have just been grateful for what we had, for the quiet intimacy of our ritual. But I knew, deep down, that I couldn't have lived in that ambiguous space forever. The silence would have eventually eroded everything anyway. The kiss, and the subsequent confrontation, had simply accelerated the process. After a week of agonizing silence, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know. I had to see him. I drove to his apartment, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. I had no idea what I was going to say. I just knew that I couldn't let it end like this, with a whispered phone call and a suffocating silence. I knocked on his door, my heart pounding in my ears. He opened it, and he looked terrible. He was pale, with dark circles under his eyes. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week. He just stared at me, his expression a mixture of surprise and fear. "Can I come in?" I asked. He hesitated for a moment, then stepped back, letting me into the sterile, impersonal space that he called home. We stood awkwardly in his living room for a moment, the silence between us a physical presence. "I'm sorry," he said finally, his voice rough, "for just disappearing. That was cowardly. Why did you, Julian?" I asked, my voice softer now, the anger replaced by a simple, desperate need to understand. He sank onto his couch, running a hand through his messy hair. "Because I was terrified," he admitted, not looking at me. "Because everything you said was true. What happened? It did mean something. It meant everything. And that's what scared me." He finally looked up, and his eyes were glistening with unshed tears. "For years, my life has been this series of temporary connections. Airports, hotels, clients. Even Sarah, in the end. It was all conditional. But you've been the only constant, the only thing that felt real and solid. And when I kissed you, it was like, I don't know, it was like coming home. And I've never felt that before. Not really. And it's so big. It's so important that the thought of messing it up, of losing you because I'm too screwed up to know how to do this right. It broke me, his confession, so raw and honest, undid me. All the anger, all the hurt, dissolved, replaced by a wave of overwhelming empathy. He hadn't been running from me. He had been running from the intensity of his own feelings, from the fear of his own inadequacy. He was the unknowing initiator, a man who had acted on instinct, on a deep, subconscious need for connection, and was only now, in the aftermath, beginning to consciously understand the implications of his own heart. I crossed the room and sat down next to him on the couch. I didn't say anything. I just took his hand. His fingers were cold. He laced them with mine, his grip tight, desperate. I'm scared too, I admitted, my voice barely a whisper. I've been in love with you for years, Julian. And I've been so terrified of losing our friendship that I never would have said a word. You were the brave one. You were the one who broke the silence. He looked at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and dawning comprehension. Years? I nodded, a small, sad smile on my lips. Years, a single tear escaped and traced a path down his cheek. God, Leo, he breathed. I'm so sorry. I've been so blind. You weren't blind, I said, squeezing his hand. You were just lost. We both were. But maybe, I said, my gaze holding his, maybe we can find our way together. The conflict was not a battle to be won, but a fog to be navigated. And in the quiet honesty of his living room, with our hands clasped together, a small, clear path finally began to appear before us. The storm had passed, leaving behind a quiet, clean-swept landscape, ready for something new to be built. The conversation in Julian's apartment was the foundation stone for our new reality. It was the painful, necessary excavation that had to happen before we could build something stable, something true. In the days and weeks that followed, we began the slow, deliberate work of construction. We talked. For the first time, we truly talked, not about work or movies or soccer, but about us. We laid our fears out on the table, examining them in the clear light of day. He spoke of his fear of intimacy, of his ingrained belief that he was somehow broken, incapable of building something that lasted. I spoke of my years of silence, of the loneliness of loving someone from afar, of my fear that I would never be seen for who I truly was. It was a process of gentle excavation, of carefully unearthing years of unspoken truths. The physical intimacy returned, but it was different now. It was no longer a silent, ambiguous negotiation. It was intentional, confident. When he took my hand now, it was not a fleeting, accidental brush, but a firm, declarative grasp. The nights in my bed were no longer fraught with tension and unspoken questions. They were filled with a profound and simple peace. We had moved beyond the need for pretense. He wasn't there because he was tired or lonely. He was there because he wanted to be with me. And I was there because it was the only place in the world I wanted to be. My apartment slowly, organically, transformed from my space into our space. His belongings no longer felt like temporary encroachments. They became part of the landscape. His favorite ugly but comfortable sweatshirt lived on the back of my armchair. His running shoes were a permanent fixture by the door. His side of the bed became, definitively, his side. We created new rituals to replace the old, anxious ones. The ritual of the morning coffee continued, but now it was often accompanied by a kiss, a shared smile over the rims of our mugs. We developed a ritual of texting each other goodnight when he was on the road, a simple sleep well that carried the weight of everything we had built. We fell into the easy, beautiful rhythm of a shared life, a rhythm composed of 1,000 tiny, mundane moments that, when woven together, created a fabric of incredible strength and beauty. We learned to navigate conflict not with silence and retreat, but with clumsy, honest words. We learned that love was not a grand, dramatic event, but a quiet, daily practice of choosing to see, to listen, and to care for another person. One Saturday afternoon, a few months into our new beginning, I was in my darkroom, developing the photos from the series I had shot when I was at the height of my lonely vigil. I was watching my own haunted face emerge in the chemical bath, a ghost from a life that already felt distant. Julian came in, standing quietly in the doorway, bathed in the dim red safety light. "What are you working on?" he asked softly. I hesitated. I had never shown him these pictures. They felt like a relic from a painful time, a confession of a sadness he had unknowingly caused. But looking at him standing there, his presence so solid and real, I knew I didn't need to hide them anymore. I pulled one of the prints from the wash, a portrait of me lying on my side of the bed, the other side a stark, empty expanse. I handed it to him. He held it carefully, his brow furrowed in concentration as he studied the image. He was silent for a long time. "This is how it felt, wasn't it?" he finally said, his voice thick with emotion. He wasn't asking. He was stating a fact he now understood with painful clarity. "All those nights, you were lying next to an empty space. Even when I was in it, sometimes," I admitted quietly. He looked from the photograph to me, his eyes filled with a deep, aching tenderness. "I'm so sorry I made you feel that way. You don't have to be sorry anymore," I said, and I meant it. "It's not empty now." He stepped forward and wrapped his arms around me, holding me tight. He rested his chin on my shoulder, his gaze still fixed on the photograph in his hand. It felt like we were closing a circle, acknowledging the past not as a source of pain, but as the necessary journey that had brought us to this moment. We were healing the ghosts of our former selves, together. The resolution of our story was not a single event, but a slow, dawning realization. It was the peace that settled over me when I'd watch him sleep, no longer analyzing his every breath, but simply enjoying the quiet comfort of his presence. It was the effortless way we learned to move around each other in my small apartment, a dance of familiarity and care. It was the day he gave his landlord notice, placing his key to my apartment on the counter not as a guest, but as a resident. The door that had once been left open out of a desperate, unspoken need was now closed at night, not to shut the world out, but to seal our small, shared world in. Life, I have learned, is not about the grand, cinematic moments. It's about the spaces in between. It's about the quiet Tuesday nights, the shared cups of coffee, the comfortable silences. It's about finding the person who makes the ordinary feel extraordinary. Julian didn't just teach me to believe in happy endings. He taught me that the best kind of happiness isn't an ending at all. It is a quiet, continuous, and beautiful beginning. We began to heal in the beautiful, honest silence we'd learned to create together, a silence that was no longer empty, but full of all the things we no longer needed to say.